Well, hi everybody, it's Pastor Joel here again with you, here to talk with you once more about the promises that God makes to us. As we start today, I wanted to take an opportunity to share a few pictures with you. A couple of weeks ago, Pastor Brett invited all of us to look at some pictures of us and the ways we've grown over the years, so I thought it would be fun if I showed you some pictures of me and the way I've grown. So the first picture I have is it's a pretty old picture. It was taken 40 years ago when I was just a little baby. That's me right there on my sister's lap. The next picture, I'm a little bit older, maybe a year and a half or so, and you can see me there with my favorite blue blanket, very precious to me. It's still pretty small. I'm a little bit bigger in this picture, but I'm still pretty small. The next picture I have was taken on a big day in my life. This is my first day of kindergarten. I had a new belt and a new watch, and I was very excited to go to school for the first time. So it's 5 years old in this picture. This picture, I'm a little older still. I'm in 4th grade, and I was in the hospital to have my tonsils taken out. But you can see that I'm quite a bit bigger. I can sit in my own chair, and and I'm well on my way to being as tall as I am now, but I'm not quite there yet. This is a picture of me when I'm even older. I think maybe I was 14 years old in this picture. And you can see that I've grown quite a lot. My shirt is far too small for me. I was being a little bit goofy. Probably shouldn't have been wearing that shirt, but there it is. And it shows how I've been growing again. In this last picture, I'm even older and I'm even taller. In fact, I'm so tall that I'm helping my dad fix a light bulb, and he needs a ladder, but I don't. My mom always makes me change the light bulbs when I come home for some reason. But just wanted to show you those pictures because those pictures remind us that all of us are growing, right? And they remind us of God's promise that the Holy Spirit will help us grow, and not just help us grow taller or bigger, but the Holy Spirit will help us to grow and be more and more like Jesus. That's the promise of God, the Holy Spirit, to us, that He'll help us grow and be like Jesus. And so today I want to tell you a story from the Bible that shows us the truth of that promise. And it's a story that is about a man you may have heard of. His name is Peter. Now, you may have heard of Peter because Peter was one of Jesus' very best friends. Peter was a disciple of Jesus who spent 3 years with Jesus. And Peter loved Jesus a lot. In fact, Peter loved Jesus so much that one night, it turned out to be the last night of Jesus' life, Peter made a big promise to Jesus. Peter said, Jesus, no matter what happens, I will never leave you. I will never turn my back on you. Jesus, I will always love you and always be with you. That was the promise Peter made. But just a few hours after Peter made that promise, something sad and scary happened. What happened is that Jesus was arrested and he was put on trial. And while Jesus was on trial, Peter was there, but Peter was kind of at a distance. It says Jesus was inside. The Bible tells us Peter was outside. He was sitting around a fire, kind of watching where he thought no one would notice him. But somebody did notice him. The Bible tells us that actually a little servant girl noticed Peter. And she said, hey, aren't you one of Jesus' disciples? Now, remember, Peter was a big, strong fisherman. And his name actually meant the rock, so maybe his nickname from Jesus was Rocky. He was a tough guy. So you would think that that Peter would not have been afraid of a little servant girl. But Peter was afraid. This girl said, you're with Jesus, aren't you? And you know what Peter said? He said, no, I don't know this man. I've never met him in my life. And the girl went away. And a little time passed, and someone else came to Peter beside the fire. And they said, hey, you know Jesus, don't you? You're one of his friends, aren't you? And once again, Peter said, no. I've never met him. I don't know who you're talking about. And then another hour passed, and someone else found Peter sitting out there by the fire. And once again, they said, "Hey, you're one of Jesus' friends, aren't you?" And once again, Peter said, "No, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know this man at all." So 3 times in a row, Peter broke his promise, and Peter refused to admit that he even knew Jesus and that Jesus was his friend. Well, you hopefully remember that story, that after that, Jesus died. And thankfully, Jesus didn't stay dead. 3 days later, Jesus became alive again. But that's not the end of the story either. And I want to tell you something that happened 50 days after that story, after Jesus became alive again. And this too is about Peter. The Bible tells us in Acts 2 is that 50 days after Jesus was made alive again, and after Jesus had gone back to heaven to be with his Father, well, Peter and some of Jesus' other friends were together in a place called Jerusalem. And while they were together, something strange and wonderful happened. It says while they were together, it sounded like a mighty wind started to blow. And if you're at home and you want to make sound effects and want it to sound like a mighty wind, you can do that. But a mighty wind happened. And then, in the midst of this mighty, noisy wind, there was something that looked like little flames of fire that came, and they came and they were floating above every person in that room, including Peter. And what the Bible tells us is that those flames, they were the Holy Spirit. And they were a sign that God's Holy Spirit, the Spirit of Jesus, had come to the people in in that room. People including Peter. So Peter now has the Holy Spirit. And do you know what Peter did as soon as he got the Holy Spirit? Well, Peter ran outside onto a balcony of that room, and he started to talk. He started to talk to a giant crowd that had gathered together in Jerusalem. It was a huge crowd. And he started to talk, he started to talk about Jesus. And he started to talk about Jesus' love for us and about how Jesus died on the cross and how he rose again for us. Peter talked and he talked and he talked for a long time about Jesus, even though some people were there making fun of Peter. Peter kept on talking, and you know what? The Bible tells us that because Peter stood up and talked about Jesus, 3,000 people believed in Jesus that day. Now, I want to tell you that story because I think Peter could only do that because he had the Holy Spirit. See, the Holy Spirit helps us grow. And one of the things that means is that the Holy Spirit helps us to do the things that God asks us to do. Like tell people about Jesus. Like be brave when we might otherwise be afraid. Right? The Holy Spirit helped Peter grow, and the Holy Spirit helps us grow. And the Holy Spirit helps us grow in all kinds of wonderful ways to be like Jesus. Sometimes it's in boldness. Sometimes it's in obedience. The Bible actually also talks about some other ways the Holy Spirit helps us grow. In fact, in Galatians 5, we read about something called the fruit of the Spirit. This morning I've been kind of walking around church humming a song some of you know. It says, "The fruit of the Spirit is not a watermelon." Right? The fruit of the Spirit is not a watermelon. No, the fruit of the Spirit is different. I'm going to try to name some of them. Maybe you can send me a note and tell me which ones I missed if you go back and read this later. But the fruit of the Spirit are things like love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Actually, when you think about it, those are all things that sound a lot like Jesus, aren't they? So that's what kind of things the Holy Spirit promises to grow in us. He promises to grow the fruit of the Spirit in us so that we can be more and more like Jesus every day. So that's God's promise for you. It's God's promise for Peter. It's God's promise for all his people because he gives us all the Holy Spirit and he promises to help us grow. Hope you remember that this week and that you'll keep in step with the Holy Spirit.